My name is David Kidwell Slack. I manage the National Plant Materials Center up in Beltsville, Maryland. And I'm going to give you a brief introduction to plant materials and plant materials usage today. So our mission focus at the Plant Materials Center is on water quality and soil health. And as you can see here, I've got a couple images. If you're able to give me a thumbs up, does anyone recognize with a thumbs up the plant that's on the left there? I am not seeing anything yet. That is, those are forage radishes that we grew. That's a plant that can be used as a cool season cover crop and can help soil compaction and increase some infiltration rates. So if you ever want to see more of those, you can come out to us in the winter and see more of them. And then on the right there is part of our land where we've got a little bit of a drainage issue, as you can see. That ponding is not our property per se, but it's just directly across the street from us, and it definitely has a negative impact. So I thought I'd show that because it's something that should be familiar to you going forward, that natural resource impacts can happen pretty much everywhere. So real briefly, the Plant Materials Program mission and vision, the materials centers assemble and test plants for use and conservation and to solve resource concerns. And then the vision of the program is to be the plant experts for the agency, integrated and coordinated with technical and field office staff. And we create vegetative solutions and technology like planting dates and planting densities for NRCS customers. Some of the products we create are technical sheets, technical notes and study reports that help support conservation practices with data, like I said, on planting rates and planting dates. And the idea as well is to help integrate those studies into the IR sheets and job sheets for the agency. And in addition, a lot of our information that we generate is included in the common planting and seeding lists, like the conservation planting guide that you have seen earlier. We also create training materials and deliver training for field staff and conservation partners, and there's a lot of opportunity for partners to come out to the PMC and learn more about plant identification. So one of the things I was going to go over today was how to calculate pure live seed. That's something that you're going to see a lot, especially on job sheets and in the planting guide. So I thought I would run by you how you can calculate PLS or pure live seed in order to meet requirements on a specification. So sort of briefly here, the way it works is you're calculating the purity of the seed that you're dealing with by the percent total germination. And that gets you a percent pure live seed. The example they have here is a 90% purity, which is a pretty high purity seed, 78% germination, and then 10% hard seed and 2% dormant. You divide that by 100 and you end up with 81% pure live seed for that specific seed that they're showing an example of. Then you take that 81% to get the bulk seed that you would actually plant. So if you need to plant, say, 1 pound per acre of 81% PLS, you actually end up planting 1.2 pounds of seed, of bulk seed, to get down to that 1 pound of pure live seed. I'm going to run through another example that may make a little bit more sense if we look at it as we go forward here. So this is a seed label that I pulled out of winter wheat, or in this case, it's spring wheat. And it's a pretty standard label that you're going to find on a given cover crop or cash crop or even pollinator planting seeds. So you're going to see pure seed. In this case, it's very pure, 99.94%. And if you look down at the sticker at the bottom there, they have a germination of 87% with a test date. So to get the pure live seed of this spring wheat, we're going to take that 99.94% pure seed and multiply it by the germination in this case. 87%. And we end up with 0.86798695, which is what you get when you multiply percents, which with basic math we know is the same as 86.95%. So if you were going to try to plant, say, wheat at 120 pounds of PLS, pure live seed per acre, then we're going to need to calculate the bulk seed that actually goes down. So in this case, we take that 120 pounds PLS, and we're going to divide it by that PLS of 86.95%, and we get 138 pounds of bulk seed. I hope this makes sense. I assume probably some folks are looking at this and wondering what it means. Hopefully you'll be able to refer back to this if you have questions. And of course, you can reach out to the Plant Materials Center staff as well if you have questions. The takeaway is that most of the time, if you want 120 pounds or 100 pounds of PLS, you're going to need to plant more than the 120 pounds to account for that germination and also the purity of the seed that you're dealing with. Another thing to think about a little bit more broadly is that for common crop seeds and cover crop seeds, the amount of weight per bushel or weight per bag varies quite a bit. So for example, again, we take wheat here that's highlighted at the bottom. A bag of wheat or a bushel of wheat, let's say, weighs about 60 pounds. That's sort of the normal weight of a bushel of wheat. Oats is another common cool season cover crop grown very similarly to wheat, but you'll find that the weight per bushel is much less. It's only 32 pounds per bushel. And that's because the seed is less dense and typically has a hull attached to it that really decreases the weight of the actual seed you're dealing with. So it's something to be aware of if someone was to try to plant on a per bag basis, a bag per acre or pounds per acre basis, that not every crop is going to do the same thing by bag basis. It really is going to be important to focus on that PLS number using the data that you have from any given bag of seed. And you can see that some of the other sort of more common plants run around the same seed rates. So if we look at corn, for example, shelled corn is about 56 pounds a bushel, which is very similar to wheat. Whereas something like, say, Bermuda grass seed is much smaller at 14 pounds for a bushel. So it's a much different density. Typically, denser seeds are going to weigh more per bushel. Like wheat is 48 pounds in bulk density per cubic foot, and that makes it a bigger weight per bag. Whereas the lower density plants will have less weight per bag. Hopefully that makes sense, not being able to see your faces. I'm hoping that is making some sense to everyone. And also, one other thing I wanted to point out about using plant materials is being aware of the difference between common names and scientific names. You've probably heard or have experienced that milkweed is a great plant for pollinators. In this case, I pulled the table from the Maryland Conservation Planting Guide on native wildflowers and legumes. And you'll find that there's actually 3 different milkweed species that are specified for use in Maryland in various planting mixes. And so knowing which species and which specific plant you're looking for can be important as well. So for example, here we see that swamp milkweed is an obligate wetland plant, whereas common milkweed can be grown in an upland or a middle ground area. So it can be really important or useful to increase the effectiveness of our plans and designs if we are aware there are differences between common names and the species they represent. And again, a lot of this you can find online. Again, you're welcome to reach out to the plant materials staff if you have questions. And another point about common names and how that can get a little bit confusing sometimes is that not all names are really very interchangeable at all. To some of you, that's going to be very obvious, I know that. But I did want to point out here another different table from the Maryland Conservation Planting Guide, and it's the permanent upland herbaceous cover mixes. And in this case, I pulled just a part of that table that shows some grasses that are commonly used. Here we have riverbank wild rye, Virginia wild rye. Again, those are two different species, somewhat interchangeable for the most part for us, but there are different wild ryes. There's even more than this that can be used in the area. So just wanted to point that out, and that those ryes are not the same as cereal rye, which is a common cover crop that most of us are very familiar with. And that's also not the same as annual ryegrass, which is a very common, quick source of cover that is used in a variety of situations. I believe it's sometimes specified for parts of grass waterway creation. Certainly for temporary cover, it can be used. And for homeowners, it's often used to put in quick cover when there's soil disturbance. So wild rye, a native grass, is not the same as cereal rye, a cover crop, which is not the same as annual ryegrass, which is a quick cover annual plant. And also, just a quick note that river oats is not the same as the oats that we would grow as a cool season cover crop either. Hopefully, again, this makes some sense. And if you have questions, reach out. And I wanted to point out another part of the Maryland Conservation Planting Guide, the temporary seeding for site stabilization. As some of you know, the common cool season plants for temporary seeding would be wheat or cereal rye or oats. But also there are some warm season grasses that are available for temporary seeding, and that there are specific ones that we have experience with at the Plant Materials Center that we can share more information about. In this case, teff is a new addition to the Conservation Planting Guide, and you'll find that it can be seeded fairly broadly in the summer from May 16th to July 31st in Zone 6B, a little bit later in 5B and 6A, a little bit later 7A through 8A. We've seeded it as late as the 10th of August in Beltsville, and it did okay, but not well. So that's the upper date there is really going to push it for even the warmer parts of Maryland. And I did want you to note that the seed rate of 7 pounds for uncoated or 10 pounds PLS for coated seed is sort of the standard. I'm going to show you a few images of what that looks like to increase your familiarity with this crop. This is a site we established last spring, actually May 31st, at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. We just took a tiller and tilled up existing poor quality turf grass and seeded on the same or the next day teff. In this case, on the right there, you'll see it's about 10 pounds per acre of coated seed, so it's right there on the recommended rate. And you can see what the cover looks like August 16th, which is what, about 10 weeks off, maybe? Yeah, about 10 weeks later. Teff can produce a very dense cover fairly quickly. It really stabilizes the soil. And here RJ is taking plant cover measurements. So we wanted to see the sort of the data on what that teff was doing. And for the most part, it did an excellent job of suppressing crabgrass, which is the #1 weed for us, I would say, during the summer. We planted vegetative plugs in this meadow establishment area, and the teff was used as either a nurse crop, cover crop, or a weed suppressing crop. Next year, this is what you sort of see with that 7 to 10 pounds per acre of teff, I should say. These are plugs. In this case, this is Coreopsis growing in among the residue left over from teff the year before. We have found that teff will suppress weeds up to 12 months after you plant it. So if you planted May 31st of 2022, you will find some weed suppression benefit through May 31st of 2023. In this case, this image of the Coreopsis was about 11 months after planting teff in an area at the Plant Materials Center. And you can see that there's really no cool season weeds to speak of, no chickweed or henbit here, and there's not really even any crabgrass coming up, even though this image was taken in June. A couple other notes of recent work that we've done that we can share more information about at a later time. Here's one of the technical notes, our newest one, which is an update of the native warm season grass variety for the Mid-Atlantic. This was work that we did to look at the conservation benefits of various native warm season grass varieties. So that would be switchgrass, little blue stem, big blue stem, Indian grass, and a little bit of eastern gamma grass. That one was a little bit tricky to grow, but the other plants are well covered. So we have the different varieties of switchgrass that you can look at. Excuse me, the different varieties of Indian grass and the different varieties of both big and little blue stem. And this can help figure out what varieties specifically might be better for different purposes. Like there are some switchgrass varieties that are a little bit smaller and a little bit easier to maintain in a wildlife planting. And there are certain big blue stem varieties that can actually be pretty good for vegetative barriers. This is another technical note we were part of that was published last year. It's the National Tech Note on Vegetative Barriers, which is a practice not used a lot in Maryland, but it is one to be aware of and one that can have some very good benefit. And that's where you see these native warm season grasses on the right. They can form very dense clusters of stems, which can really slow down overland flow. And so they've been specified for use in soil conservation purposes, specifically with soil stabilization on contours. And we found that there are a handful of varieties that did very, very well in terms of just the sheer number of stems and the thickness of those stems that persist through much of the winter. As I mentioned before, we provide training opportunities at the Plant Material Center. This is an image from last fall, I believe September of 2021, where we were doing a plant identification class here on the forest edge to go over some of those native wildflowers. The most obvious is the goldenrod there, but there's some asters as well. And then we also do a pretty robust weed identification class. For those of you with a keen eye, you can probably see kudzu in this image. And many other weeds as well. So we do keep some of those around so that we can make sure staff and partners are well aware of identifying those important plants. And then a plug for a recent project that we're working on. We've been working at the Plant Material Center to reintroduce the People's Garden down at the National Mall out in front of the USDA headquarters building. It's a project that will involve urban farming for the most part. It's going to be a vegetable garden where we really help educate the American public about food supply chain resilience, urban agriculture, urban conservation, and a handful of other topics as well. So it's something that we've been working on a lot, and you'll probably hear a little bit more about in the coming few years, actually. And that is all I have got. I welcome any questions.
Thanks, David. Do we have any questions for David?